To China, where Canadian diplomats are working to gain access to Michael Spavor. He's one of 2 Canadians detained in the wake of the Huawei executive arrest in Vancouver. Spavor and Michael Kovrig are accused of endangering China's state security. As Katie Simpson tells us, the Trudeau government now has a powerful ally in its standoff with Beijing.
There were some uncomfortable conversations around this table. The first face-to-face meeting between Canada and the U.S. since the dramatic escalation of tensions with China. When they emerged from 2 hours of talks, Canada's closest ally offered up tempered public support.
The unlawful detention of 2 Canadian citizens is unacceptable. They ought to be returned.
The Secretary of State didn't go any further in offering to help Canada navigate its diplomatic dilemma, which began after Canada arrested Huawei's CFO at the request of the U.S. Justice Department, and became worse when Donald Trump said he'd interfere in the case to improve his relationship with Beijing. The Foreign Affairs Minister criticized those comments behind closed doors.
The rule of law and extradition issues ought not ever to be politicized or used as tools to resolve other issues.
Chrystia Freeland says Ottawa is seized with helping the 2 Canadians held by the Chinese.
We are being absolutely clear on standing up for our citizens who have been detained, trying to figure out why, trying to work with China to demonstrate that this is not acceptable.
Repeating that message is one of few options Canada has to calm the situation, according to this former Foreign Affairs advisor.
It is important that we maintain a channel of communication open with China. We don't want this situation to escalate out of control.
Friends of the detained Canadians, including this former diplomat who knows Michael Spavor, are now trying to be patient in light of so much uncertainty.
I would say he's a very resilient personality. My greatest concern would be that the resolution of the case drags on.
I'm told the only issue the embassy is focusing on right now is getting support to those 2 detained Canadians. It's essentially become a round-the-clock operation at this point. Here in Ottawa, there might be some time to regroup and find new ways to try to get Canada's message to resonate in Beijing that the government won't intervene in the Huawei court case.
The CBC's Katie Simpson reporting. Jeffrey Sachs has been closely watching this story. He is an American economist and director of Columbia University's Center for Sustainable Development. We've reached him in Warsaw, Poland. Thank you for joining us, Professor Sachs. Many people say that Canada caught in the middle of a trade war between the U.S. and China. How do you see it?
I think that's basically right. I think that the arrest of Ms. Meng was very inappropriate, completely outside the norm. And I think Canada's doing the bidding of United States policy that is not well controlled or well modulated.
Could you understand the argument, though, that Canada has said that because of the extradition treaty, when the U.S. makes a request like this, we have to accede to that? Well, yes, I can understand that argument, but I can't understand grabbing a senior executive on these particular claims. You know, she's charged with, as I understand it, fraud for a presentation she gave to HSBC about Iran dealings. It's interesting that HSBC was itself sanctioned for massive violations of U.S. sanctions to Iran and to others, but not a single executive faced any charges, much less an arrest in a foreign airport and dragged through a process like this. This is extraordinary, and I understand why China's reaction is as it is, because it's absolutely, completely out of the norm. So along those lines, you point out in a powerful editorial you wrote this week that it is the U.S. and not China that is the greatest threat to the international rule of law. Tell us more about that. The fact is, look, you have a neighbor to the south that's quite erratic, but basically a little bit unhinged at China's rise in power. And the United States is very explicitly now saying we're going to try to stop China's rise and have called on companies and governments around the world to stop doing business with the leading Chinese companies without evidence, but it's very easy to appeal to fear. And so I'm hearing a lot of people say, oh, yeah, they're terrible. You can't do business with them. They're all cheats, blah, blah, blah. But basically, this is a pretty well-known American approach to use its power to try to break the economic momentum of a rival. And I think it's very, very bad behavior and very dangerous, actually, for the world to have a new Cold War right now, and Cold Wars can turn into hot wars, I think is extraordinarily provocative. You know, the United States is not led by a government that believes in cooperation. It believes in unilateralism. Canada felt some of that. I think I don't trust what the United States government right now is doing on almost any front. But what I see is a lot of extraordinarily heated rhetoric that is basically leading us into a dangerous new confrontation. And if you know the U.S. mentality, this is the U.S. Cold War mentality being replayed. The U.S. just doesn't want any rivals anywhere.
Okay, then against that backdrop, with 2 Canadians languishing somewhere in a prison in China, what are Canada's options at this point?
I think Canada should look at the record. How many CFOs have been nabbed off of airplanes for the kinds of things that Madam Meng is charged with? I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find any precedents at all. I think that Canada should reflect on the fact that the United States is now trying to impose sanctions vis-a-vis Iran that are completely in violation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2231. So the whole notion of U.S. extraterritorial sanctions, which is again part of this case, albeit with different timing, is highly suspect. The United States stands alone in trying to break the nuclear deal with Iran, another very dangerous action. Maybe Canada's being used and manipulated not only vis-a-vis China, but for the United States to try to show anyone, you dare cross us on any business with Iran, you're going to pay a price. But the U.S. is in violation of international law deeply on these new sanctions vis-a-vis Iran, because the whole world agreed at the United Nations that it would restore business with Iran. Then comes Trump, and I think everybody knows how unstable that character is. And here we go again with the brazen unilateral moves. To my view, Canada should reflect independently and realize that what it's being asked to do is completely outside the international norm and very provocative.